Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm here again with the Integrated HPS grant, and I'm really excited to be talking to Dr. Alan Love today. He's the John M. Dolan Professor of Philosophy at the Minnesota Center for Philosophy of Science at the University of Minnesota, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with him today. So we can get started, if that's good with you. So it's really cool to me, or interesting, I guess is a better word to use, that you're able to do this sort of like really interdisciplinary work with like all different sorts of people, like sociologists, anthropologists, and scientists. Have you done a lot of work like that in your career, or is this kind of like a new?
No, that's actually pretty normal. It's been my kind of standard working mode for many years. I think it probably was natural in part because I came out of the sciences into history and philosophy of science. So I kind of always had an orientation towards practice. I also, while I was doing my PhD, did a master's degree in biology at the same time. So in the midst of writing my PhD, so I also had this kind of strong connection with the practice of science while I was doing my historical and philosophical work. The collaborations have emerged very organically over time. None of them are sort of so clearly, yeah, I would have imagined you would work with that person. They more have to do with opportunity and the way in which things kind of cascade. As you spend time interacting, you meet at a workshop, you say, hey, I'm going to organize a workshop, and so you invite somebody who you met at another workshop, and there's this snowball effect where after a while you realize, hey, we're talking about a paper, and let's write it. And so then you do. And then you can have situations where somebody who's a collaborator of the other person gets pulled in, and you may not have been talking to them at all. Or in the case of the sciences relationships, say with lab members, say postdocs who are working in the lab at the time, I mean, the sciences generally are much more collaborative than the humanities, and so that culture of collaboration is very normal for the scientists, and was something that I was quite comfortable with and have felt like I could work quite effectively at that juncture of the different disciplines. I do think that it is a potential challenge for any of us working in integrated HPS, because we have to be careful about sort of maintaining appropriate interpretive distance, because sometimes we are making claims that the people who are involved are going to disagree with or have strong feelings about. And I have certainly been in collaborations where things got tense.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. Oh man, that's really awesome that you get to do a lot of interdisciplinary things going. I guess this is more as a question about your process. Do you have a set writing process or a set process how you decide to work on things and when you decide to work on things? And additionally, since you have so many collaborators on your project, does that change your writing process or style at all?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, at least, it requires maybe a ability to switch gears pretty quickly, because you sometimes are moving in and out of very different contexts, especially if you're writing and the writing is for different audiences. And so you're changing expectations about, well, what can I assume the reader knows, and those sorts of questions. I think sometimes that's quite difficult to do, and I don't necessarily do it well. I think sometimes it slows me down, and it's probably normal that it would have that effect on people. However, at the same time, I feel like there's advantages to it, because I oftentimes find that I'm cross-pollinating by shifting back and forth between these projects. I think, oh, what I saw over there is actually relevant also over here. And because I had to switch back and forth relatively quickly between them, because we're working on the papers and we just had a meeting together and now we have a meeting together with these people, I actually can better apply those things in real time as I'm learning the lessons from that work. I think that the hardest part is sort of making sure that you give yourself small milestones for making progress so that you don't feel like something is stalling. So oftentimes I will tell myself, okay, despite the fact that my email box is jam-packed with things that are supposedly urgent, I want to come out of the day having done some writing, even if it's only for half an hour, 45 minutes. And even if it's the case that I end up having to heavily revise that writing, at least I've undertaken that this day. At the same time, there are days where it's not that the writing needs to be done, it's actually the reading, where I will sometimes say, you know what, I'm really distracted by all this stuff, but what I really need to do is read these 2 papers. And I need to like step away from the computer or turn off my email and do that. So I think that if you're making this kind of quick movement between different projects, it can have advantages, but it can have disadvantages. And yet also all of us are kind of overly busy with regular tasks that sometimes seem like they're more urgent or they have to be dealt with immediately. And I think then what you have to do is not despair, but rather give yourself a few strategies for making bite-sized progress on the principle that you eat the elephant one bite at a time. And so then the question is not, did you eat the elephant, but did you have a bite today?
That's very good advice. That's a good way to put things in perspective with work, especially if you do so many different things. I can't imagine trying to teach and then, having so many different kind of projects going. Yeah.
Well, now one thing to keep in mind though is that it grew organically over time. So if you dialed back to earlier in my career, I was not trying to do that many things. In part, I was working out of my dissertation, and which is the very normal thing to do as you're starting out. You've got a much tighter focus. And I think that the question then is one of how much do you open that up over time? And it's much easier to open that up when you are at certain career stages. So maybe if you already have tenure, you feel more comfortable trying some things that might not work. That's harder to do when you're an assistant professor and you feel like I need to get this paper out in order to build up my tenure dossier. So I would say that some of what you see now is something that you would not expect to see earlier in career trajectory, and that in fact you might argue that if you did see it earlier in somebody's career trajectory, you might warn them and say, be careful, because this could get you into trouble. I mean, a classic example of this in philosophy is single authorship. So most philosophy departments still take single authorship as a kind of gold standard for work that's done. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time talking to somebody about a paper that I had done in the sciences and was the first author of 4 authors and had done the bulk of the work in the lab and had done the bulk of the writing of the paper. And somebody said, oh, so you're one of 4 authors, so you contributed 25%.
Oh, no.
and you sort of realize, oh, wow, this is, many people don't have a good way of understanding division of labor in some of these scientific contexts. because clearly you don't divide simply by the number of authors on the paper. But if that's what's perceived, then you have to be really careful, because if you are the assistant professor, the non-tenured faculty member, you're not in a position to argue as easily why the multi-authored paper is more your own in lots of ways than maybe some of the other authors. And so I think that as a general counsel, it's still important for younger philosophers and historians, I think, to make sure that they have some clear single author contributions so that those sorts of questions can be, negated. And that when you get past some of those initial hurdles, you can adopt the workflow that you enjoy and are most productive in. And for some people, that will continue to be mostly individual. Mm-hmm. So it's not that you can't continue productively in that vein. Many people do. But I think that for some of us, and I take myself to be in this category, we really enjoy the collaborative dimension of scholarship. And now I'm in a position where I can pursue that much more so according to my own interests, and not feel like maybe there will be a shadow hanging over that effort because somebody else might not understand it.
Yeah, that seems like a really great place to be career-wise, though, to have that freedom to kind of work how you want to work to some degree. Obviously,
ideally, you could. I mean, I think that would be what we would hope for when you're in a position where you have that kind of structure due to tenure or something like that. It would give you some of that freedom. I do think that an important lesson, though, and this is maybe hard for philosophy as a discipline to sometimes hear, is we need to be careful about expecting everybody to work in the same way. I think that scholars work differently. Some work more individually, some work more collaboratively, some work within disciplinary boundaries, some work across disciplinary boundaries. And it's not that one or the other of these is the better or the only way, but most of the time, there's a kind of standard expectation about what your work will look like that comes from other people who think, well, my work looks like that, so should yours. And so to me, the key thing is sort of making sure that your colleagues, whoever they are, whatever place you land, whatever community, intellectual community you find yourself in, that there's a kind of clear articulation of those preferences so that there isn't any kind of misunderstanding about, well, why are you doing what you're doing? And why did you adopt that strategy or that methodology, that collaboration, rather than working individually or only publishing in these journals and not those journals or something like that? I think it's that transparency of methodology that's really important, but we oftentimes don't have ways to convey that. It's not always, it's not the equivalent, I guess, of water cooler conversation in the philosophy department. Doesn't typically revolve around these sorts of things, in part because it requires acknowledging diversity, acknowledging that we're not all cut from the same cloth, and that actually is a good thing. And I think it's actually, in the history of philosophy, one of the most important things about philosophical inquiry, that there are many ways to do it, and that it's a good thing that people don't all take the same strategy in undertaking their analyses, whatever the subject matter they're interested in.
Yeah, I agree. That's really great. I think it's a lot of times, it's hard to kind of put that into perspective too, that everybody kind of works differently. Yeah, thank you. That was all like really great advice. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your answers.